Welcome to the first episode of New Important Things series in this channel. In this first episode, we will look at the Artemis Program. To understand humanity's return to the moon, one must look back to the Apollo program, a triumph of engineering born from the existential crucible of the Cold War. When Apollo 17 departed the lunar surface in December 1972, few imagined that more than half a century would pass before human eyes would again look back at Earth from cislunar space. In the intervening decades, the United States directed its aerospace ambitions toward low Earth orbit, developing the Space Shuttle and assembling the International Space Station, transforming space into a laboratory for sustained scientific research. Yet, the dream of deep space exploration never truly died. The Artemis program represents the most complex, expensive, and geopolitically significant mobilization of scientific and industrial might in the history of human spaceflight. It is not merely a repetition of Apollo's sprint for flags and footprints, but a marathon designed to establish a permanent, commercially viable, and internationally collaborative human presence on the Moon, and eventually on Mars. To grasp the magnitude of this endeavor, we must examine the harmonized timeline of its history, its technical architecture, the domestic and international politics that shape it, the economics that fuel it, and the scientific discoveries that await at the lunar South Pole. The roots of the modern Artemis architecture were planted in the legislative soil of the mid-2000s. Following the loss of the Space Shuttle Columbia, the United States recognized the urgent need for a new deep space transportation system, birthing the Constellation program in 2005. Constellation was a sweeping vision that aimed to return astronauts to the Moon by 2020 as a preliminary step toward Mars. The plan relied on the Ares I rocket for crew transport, the massive Ares 5 rocket for cargo, the Orion crew exploration vehicle, and a lunar lander named Altair. However, ambitions soon collided with budgetary reality. By 2009, Constellation was severely behind schedule and hemorrhaging funds. The Obama administration convened the Augustine Committee, which found that Constellation was fundamentally underfunded and a 2020 landing was impossible without a massive influx of capital. Consequently, in April 2010, President Barack Obama officially canceled the non-Orion elements of the Constellation program, proposing instead to focus on an eventual Mars orbit mission in the 2030s. The cancellation of Constellation provoked intense resistance from Congress, particularly from lawmakers representing districts heavily invested in the retiring Space Shuttle program. To preserve the highly specialized workforce, protect sunk costs, and maintain heavy lift capabilities, Congress pushed back with the NASA Authorization Act of 2010. This legislation mandated the immediate development of a new super heavy lift rocket, the Space Launch System, or SLS. To appease political demands, the law required the SLS to use legacy hardware derived from the Space Shuttle and Constellation. The SLS would be powered by 4 refurbished RS-25 engines that had flown on shuttle missions, flanked by 2 elongated solid rocket boosters. The Orion spacecraft was preserved, but its architecture underwent a critical shift. NASA entered into a profound international partnership, with the European Space Agency agreeing to provide the European Service Module. This module would house the spacecraft's primary propulsion, power, and life support systems, binding European aerospace capabilities to the critical path of the American deep space program. For several years, the SLS and Orion programs labored through a difficult development cycle characterized by shifting political mandates, cost overruns, and schedule delays. The definitive strategic correction occurred during the Trump administration. On December 11, 2017, President Donald Trump signed Space Policy Directive 1, redefining NASA's overarching objectives. The directive called for a United States-led return to the Moon, abandoning an unpopular asteroid mission and establishing lunar surface operations as the essential proving ground for Mars. NASA was to lead an innovative program integrating commercial and international partners from the beginning. On March 26, 2019, Vice President Mike Pence delivered a geopolitically charged speech directing NASA to accelerate its lunar landing timeline by 4 years, moving the target from 2028 to 2024. Shortly after, on May 16, 2019, NASA officially christened the campaign Artemis. In Greek mythology, Artemis is the goddess of the moon and the twin sister of Apollo, providing a symbolic narrative bridge between the triumphs of the 1960s and the ambitions of the 21st century. This sudden acceleration of the timeline was a direct response to a rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape. The old Cold War space race was a symbolic contest between the United States and the Soviet Union, focused on demonstrating technological superiority. The modern space race is an entirely different paradigm, centered on economic hegemony, resource extraction, and formulating the legal frameworks that will govern the cosmos. As the United States reorganized around Artemis, the People's Republic of China emerged as a formidable pacing competitor. Supported by state-owned enterprises, Beijing demonstrated alarming technical proficiency, becoming the first nation to successfully land a robotic rover on the far side of the moon and return samples. China, in partnership with Russia, announced its own lunar program, the International Lunar Research Station, or ILRS. The ILRS aims to establish a presence at the lunar South Pole, operating under a model of centralized state control that stands in stark contrast to the American approach. Recognizing that the nation that establishes a sustained presence on the moon will dictate the rules of the cislunar economy, the United States moved swiftly to build a diplomatic coalition. In 2020, they established the Artemis Accords. These are not a traditional multilateral treaty, but a set of bilateral agreements grounded in the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. They're designed to establish customary international law through peaceful operation, emphasizing transparency, the sharing of scientific data, interoperability, and the right to extract space resources. Crucially, the accords introduce the concept of safety zones to prevent harmful interference between competing operations, laying the groundwork for a regulated space economy. By the mid-2020s, over 40 nations had signed the Artemis Accords. This geopolitical bifurcation is strictly enforced by domestic American law, specifically the Wolf Amendment, which prohibits NASA from cooperating bilaterally with China due to national security and technology transfer risks inherent in dual-use aerospace technology. As a result, the moon has become a new theater for terrestrial geopolitical realignment, forcing middle powers to choose between the Artemis Coalition and the Sino-Russian ILRS ecosystem. To win this new space race, NASA recognized it could no longer rely solely on the traditional slow-moving procurement models that characterized the Apollo era. The economics of the Artemis program required a metamorphosis. The financial commitment is staggering. NASA's total Artemis campaign costs are projected to reach $93 billion from fiscal year 2012 through 2025. However, this massive expenditure serves as a powerful domestic economic engine. The Artemis program supports more than 69,000 jobs across the United States, generating over $14 billion in total economic output and an estimated $1.5 billion in tax revenues. Prime contractors manage a vast supply chain encompassing more than 2,700 suppliers spread across all 50 states. This highly distributed manufacturing base drives domestic innovation in critical fields like advanced additive manufacturing, while simultaneously ensuring robust bipartisan political support across congressional districts. To ensure long-term sustainability and reduce the cost of access to the lunar surface, NASA introduced the Commercial Lunar Payload Services (CLPS) initiative. Shifted from being the owner of the spacecraft to a customer purchasing a delivery service, NASA began offering fixed-price task orders to private American companies to deliver scientific instruments to the moon. This drastically lowered the financial barrier to entry. Early CLPS task orders averaged a fraction of historical costs, typically between $70 million and $120 million. The initiative has been a crucible of high-risk, high-reward commercial spaceflight. In early 2024, Astrobotic's Peregrine lander suffered a critical propulsion failure and was unable to reach the moon. However, the resilience of the commercial model was proven weeks later when Intuitive Machines successfully landed its Nova-C lander near the lunar South Pole, becoming the first commercial spacecraft to operate on the lunar surface. Other vendors secured their own nine-figure contracts to deliver payloads through the end of the decade, establishing a vibrant subsector in lunar surface operations. This commercial philosophy was extended to the most critical component of the architecture, the human landing system. In April 2021, NASA shocked the aerospace establishment by awarding a single $2.9 billion firm fixed-price contract to SpaceX to develop the initial HLS based on its revolutionary Starship vehicle. This decision provoked fierce protests and lawsuits from competing consortiums, including Blue Origin. Ultimately, NASA upheld the decision and later brought Blue Origin into the architecture to build a secondary landing system, ensuring redundancy. The selection of SpaceX's Starship introduced unprecedented operational complexity. Because the vehicle is massive and utilizes super-chilled cryogenic propellants, it cannot fly directly to the moon. Instead, SpaceX must launch multiple tanker variants to aggregate propellant in an orbiting depot. Only once this depot is full can the specialized HLS Starship launch, rendezvous, transfer the fuel in microgravity, and ignite its engines for the moon. This architecture demands a staggering launch cadence, shifting massive developmental risks from the taxpayer to the private sector. With components slowly falling into place, the Space Launch System roared to life on November 16, 2022, initiating the uncrewed Artemis 1 mission. Orion traveled 1.4 million miles into deep space, but post-flight analysis revealed unexpected erosion of its ablative heat shield. This anomaly, combined with life support testing failures and hydrogen leaks, delayed the first crewed flight, Artemis 2. Finally, on April 1, 2026, the mission successfully launched. 4 astronauts, Commander Reed Wiseman, pilot Victor Glover, mission specialist Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen flew on a 10-day free return trajectory around the moon. Crucially, they executed manual piloting demonstrations, taking control of Orion to perform intricate proximity operations relative to the discarded upper stage. This rigorous demonstration proved future crews could safely dock with commercial lunar landers in the void of space, all while witnessing the profound psychological milestone of an Earthrise. Even as the Artemis 2 crew returned safely, the broader architecture was undergoing a radical metamorphosis. For years, a central pillar had been the Lunar Gateway, a modular space station intended to be assembled in orbit around the moon to serve as a deep space staging point. However, manufacturing and deploying deep space infrastructure proved formidable. The Gateway modules fell severely behind schedule, with the core living quarters suffering from complex structural overweight issues and ongoing corrosion. Furthermore, forcing massive commercial landers to rendezvous with Gateway imposed significant performance penalties. Facing these technical debts and the accelerated cadence of China's lunar ambitions, NASA made a ruthless architectural pivot. In March 2026, Administrator Jared Isaacman officially paused and sidelined the Lunar Gateway program in its current orbital form, abandoning the station to focus entirely on building infrastructure directly on the lunar surface. Future Orion missions would bypass an orbital station entirely and dock directly with commercial landing systems in space. This sudden shift had profound diplomatic consequences, particularly for Canada, whose advanced Canadarm3 robotic arm was designed specifically to maintain the now sidelined Gateway, forcing rapid renegotiations for surface operations. The sidelining of Gateway accompanied a massive restructuring of the mission timeline toward a more methodical, risk-averse approach. Acknowledging that complex orbital refueling and the development of new Axiom spacesuits required more time, NASA updated the architecture in early 2026. Targeted for mid-2027, Artemis 3 will now be a crewed demonstration mission confined to low Earth orbit, where astronauts will practice rendezvous and docking procedures with commercial landers. Consequently, Artemis 4, targeted for early 2028, will claim the historic mantle of the first mission to land humans on the surface since 1972. Utilizing the more powerful Block 1B variant of the SLS, 4 astronauts will journey to cislunar space, dock directly with a pre-positioned lander, and 2 will descend to the treacherous and mysterious lunar South Pole. The decision to target the lunar South Pole is driven by the paramount scientific and economic objective of the entire program, the hunt for water. Because the moon's axis of rotation is nearly perpendicular to the sun, deep impact craters at the poles act as extreme cold traps, locking in ancient volatile compounds.
Finding this ice is so critical that NASA commissioned the Volatiles Investigating Polar Exploration Rover, or VIPER. Designed to survive brutal thermal swings, VIPER was contracted to map the distribution of ice around the Noble crater. The high-resolution resource maps generated by VIPER will dictate the exact landing coordinates for the Artemis 4 crew, ensuring they are placed within walking distance of extractable ice. The extraction of this ice is the absolute prerequisite for the economic viability of deep space exploration, known as in situ resource utilization. Water ice can be purified for astronauts, separated for breathable oxygen, and, most importantly, electrolyzed into liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen to refuel spacecraft. The Moon transitions from being a destination into a refueling depot, drastically lowering the cost of venturing further into the solar system and driving the geopolitical rush to secure advantageous terrain. Following the historic Artemis 4 landing, the program will rapidly accelerate. Artemis 5, targeted for late 2028, will deliver the second crew and initiate the deployment of the foundational infrastructure for the Artemis base camp. With the orbital gateway abandoned, NASA outlined a definitive three-phase architecture to build out this permanent settlement. Phase 1 utilizes commercial payload services to deliver power generators and a lunar terrain vehicle. Phase 2 brings the full weight of the international coalition, highlighting the Japan Aerospace Exploration Agency delivering a pressurized lunar rover that acts as a mobile habitat. Finally, Phase 3 marks the transition to a permanent human settlement, utilizing massive commercial landers to deliver heavy surface habitats provided by NASA and the Italian Space Agency by the early 2030s. Ultimately, every component of the Artemis program serves a singular, transcendent purpose, preparing humanity for the journey to Mars. The Moon is an unforgiving environment, possessing extreme thermal gradients, highly abrasive dust, and intense cosmic radiation. The Artemis base camp will serve as the ultimate, indispensable proving ground. It is here that engineers will test closed-loop life support systems, validate radiation-hardened electronics, and perfect the nuclear fission surface power systems that will provide reliable energy through the freezing lunar nights. Only by mastering the ability to live, work, and extract resources continuously on the Moon can NASA and its allies realistically confront the exponentially greater challenges of a multi-year human expedition to the Red Planet. The Artemis program is not the end of a journey, but the true beginning of humanity's sustained expansion into the cosmos.
The Artemis program, orchestrated by the NASA, represents a paradigm shift in deep space exploration, transitioning from historically centralized governmental production to a decentralized public-private partnership model. The foundational transportation architecture of the program relies heavily on the Space Launch System, SLS, and the Orion spacecraft. The Boeing company serves as the prime contractor for the SLS core stage, an engineering marvel powered by RS-25 engines supplied by Aerojet Rocketdyne, while Northrop Grumman provides the high-thrust solid rocket boosters. The Orion crew module, responsible for safely transporting astronauts through translunar space, is spearheaded by Lockheed Martin. Conversely, Orion's critical propulsion, thermal control, and life support systems are housed within the European Service Module, which is supplied by Airbus Defence and Space under the oversight of the European Space Agency, illustrating the deeply international nature of the procurement strategy. SpaceX was selected to develop a specialized lunar derivative of its Starship architecture for the initial return missions, while Blue Origin was subsequently contracted to supply the Blue Moon lander to ensure redundancy and competition for future sustained exploration. Surface operations require similarly advanced commercial hardware. Axiom Space was awarded the primary contract to design, manufacture, and supply the next-generation extravehicular mobility units, replacing legacy spacesuits with highly articulated, commercially viable alternatives engineered for the harsh lunar environment. Furthermore, the development of the Lunar Terrain Vehicle, LTV, a highly resilient, unpressurized rover,
essential for extended geological surveying and crew mobility, is currently being pursued through competitive feasibility studies involving commercial entities such as Intuitive Machines, Lunar Outpost, and Venturi Astrolab. The supply chain for the cislunar orbital outpost, Lunar Gateway, is equally distributed among specialized commercial actors. Maxar Technologies was contracted to engineer the Power and Propulsion Element, PPE, which relies on advanced solar electric propulsion to maintain the station's unique near-rectilinear halo orbit. Concurrently, Northrop Grumman is responsible for constructing the Habitation and Logistics Outpost, HALO, providing the foundational pressurized volume for visiting crews. By strategically delegating the development of discrete infrastructural components to specialized suppliers, NASA is successfully distributing programmatic risks while simultaneously cultivating a robust commercial cislunar economy.